Hello, friends. In this talk or conversation, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on uh, of my travels through Central Asia. A couple of months ago, me and all my friends, from college days, we sort of got together after a good long 30 years in Kazakhstan, and Prasad Bhamre, who's sort of living and working there, hosted us there. It was Asad, Pillai, Papu, myself, Nair, and Prasad. So all of us were, sort of getting together there. And it was wonderful to be there from many perspectives, from various facets of life. Primarily, we got to see as a group each other after 30 long years. We have been meeting one off occasionally here and there, but as a group, we kind of connected after 30 long years. Second thing is, we have never been to Central Asia except Prasad, who lives there, none of us. And having read so much of history uh, and sort of geographic, books and geopolitical, you know, sort of material over the last 30, 40 years, it was good to, lay your foot down and walk the trails that Genghis Khan and his Mongol army would have walked hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So it was almost right reliving those books, uh, you know, Silk Road, and the whole, sort of narrative around how Soviet Union, how Russia kind of conquered the Central Asia and Caucasian, you know, uh, part of the world, and how it became Soviet Union. And so having read all that, and be able to put your foot down on it and see the topography, the land, the people, the cultures up close and personal, it was a very thrilling, intellectually very stimulating experience. So in this talk, I just want to share my sort of create this video blog to lay down my thoughts and observations and feelings, and sort of enjoy that conversation. It's a fascinating place, beautiful part of the world, and I'm sure when I'm talking about Kazakhstan, quite a bit is applicable to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and that whole Central Asian region, north of Afghanistan and north of Pakistan and west of Himalayan region, you might call it. My initial, feelings were uh, of great sort of surprise, and I just a thrilling, sort of you could feel the thrill, because having read so much about that part of the world, to put your foot down and see the people up close and personal, interact with them, was phenomenal. Now, it wasn't pure experience of what Genghis Khan and his people would have felt passing through that part of the world, because since then Soviet Union occupied, or sort of had a very close tie relationship with all these countries. You could see the Soviet influence of being very centralized, controlled system. They just got their freedom from Soviet Union, or became independent again in 1990 after the fall of Berlin Wall. So, but you can feel that whole Soviet footprint, and sort of Soviet socialist model is still very applicable there. Most of these countries have been ruled by strongmen, or almost dictatorial tendency oriented people. They get elected, they stay for 30 years, 20 years, till they sort of, then they slowly pass it on to their successors. So democracy does not exist there, and who are we to question which system is best for them? I think they are figuring it out on their own. All these countries are sitting on tremendous amount of natural resources, so there is an economic aspect to life there. there's a social aspect to life there, political, and of course the geopolitical. So let me, touch each one of them from my perspective. Coming to history first, so most of these countries are heavily influenced, culturally very aligned to the the nomadic way of life that existed uh, around Mongol era, and since I think till about 100 years ago. Societies only started to settle down there about 100 years ago, if I'm not wrong. And you could still see the naivety in life there. It's very sort of virgin, simplistic, and does not have the what I call the complexity or nuanced and culturally enriching sort of exposure or life that you see in Southeast Asia or older cultures and civilizations. Second part that jumps at you is that why they were nomads. You can see because of the weather, the topography. Uh, there's not much that you can have a sort of a settled life there because of the water, the river system, and the way the land is. That people probably were a lot more comfortable and sort of were able to sustain themselves as nomads. You see these grasslands and steppes for thousands and thousands of miles, and gives you a sense how Genghis Khan and his army could sort of run through the entire Central Asia and reach all the way up to Turkey and Syria and whatnot, because his army did not have to carry all the rations and supplies, and they could horses could sustain on the rich grass, and they survived and sustained themselves on the everything that the horses produce, from milk to the meat to the skin and whatnot, and anything else that they needed, they could sort of loot and plunder the cities that came along the way. And once Genghis Khan had done that, I mean, he created the whole civilizations where his sons and grandsons continued to rule the whole Central Asia, Middle East, Far East, and had a sort of tremendous amount of influence all the way up to Caucasus, Caucasian region, the Southeast Asia, the Far East, Central Asia, the Middle East, and all the way up to North Africa. And you can see that one credit you have to give to Genghis Khan as people, that they were brilliant warriors, very disciplined force, and they could make the best of whatever they could get from the land and turn themselves into something better than the others so they could conquer them. People still look very sort of have Mongolian features, and you can see because it's the same race. There is, of course, Caucasian mixed people that you come across. Ethnicity, Soviet Republic, of course, forced people to migrate and move and settle everywhere else. So there's a little bit of a mix, but majority are very Mongolian descendant. Very simple sort of people, I'm sure. In terms of political apparatus, they are very centralized, controlled, and secret services and everything else is involved. But you talk to average person, either because of living in the ex-Soviet system or whatnot, they come across as very simple and sort of gentle folks, going about their own way, and you don't see much of what I call controlled chaos or spicy chaos of life there as much as you see in Southeast Asia and whatnot. And to a certain extent, even in America, those sort of freedoms don't exist. So people kind of live a very straitjacket life, and it comes across as very serene and calm and peaceful. Second, another thing that jumps at you is it's there's 18 million people in a land mass of the size of India, so very sparsely populated, swaths and massive amount of countryside with nobody to, for hundreds of miles. And when you come across a small settlement, they call it a village. It looks like a, sort of artificially erected, very young cluster of houses with sort of modern concrete and roofs and stuff like that. So very simplistic version of life. Of course, it's very windy because there are just plains, especially in you know Astana area. Almaty was beautiful. It was right by the Tian Shan Mountains on the border of Tajikistan and I think China. So the other side of the mountains would be Uyghur and Tajik people. Uh, they all look, sort of Mongolian descendants. So it's like You travel through Southeast Asia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, we all look alike because it's the same race. Same thing in that part of the world. But Almaty was beautiful. Economically, it's a very resource rich country. So all the, as I said, 18 million people, massive amount of land. So they have all sorts of minerals, oil, gas, uranium, and everything else. So most of the economy is run on exporting these natural resources. Not much of a value add that happens. So in terms of how they are plugged in into global supply chain, it's primarily due to being a resource rich region and supplying these resources to, I would think, mostly to China now. I don't think India has tapped into it, and to maybe they must have been exporting it to Russia and Soviet Union because of their close ties and politically being the same nation till about 30 years ago. So the whole access to Central Asia, when people talk from geopolitics, that India wants to reach that region, China has already sort of captured that entire through BRI, Belt Road and Initiative, and they have historical ties as well from Uyghur region passing through Silk Road that used to pass through Central Asia up to Europe and whatnot. So they are upgrading the Silk Road infrastructure to get closely plugged in into Chinese economics and through supply chain and become a net supplier of all these minerals. China will manufacture it again, then ship it back again through Silk Road route to Europe and the other part of the world. So that is their a pretty good standard of living because of all the income through minerals and oil and gas. Very small population, so people are you know very decent, well off, and I'm sure there are a lot of smart people who are running companies there who are plugged in into large corporations and doing well for their nation. As I said, socially, we were just there for a week, so we didn't get to interact very closely with local population, but apparently seems to be very happy or satisfied with what they have been provided with their government and whatever their skills they're getting upgraded. With the oil and gas and mineral money coming in, they are making tremendous amount of investments to build up universities, new institutions, and so on and so forth. Uh, the last part, of course, was very personal, just to hang out with friends after 30 years, so you know how your days and nights went. It was all catching up, sharing jokes, having a good laugh, and just enjoying the camaraderie and sort of social life of Central Asia. Very beautiful country to hike, bike, and travel through. Very hospitable people. Food is very the what a, from the nomadic culture that you can imagine, meat, raw fruits and vegetables. Fruits and vegetables and everything was very tasty because I don't think they put any fertilizers or chemical industrialization of agriculture has taken place. So it's still very organic and grows through either natural fertilization of the soil. So very tasty fruits and vegetables and food. I saw quite a bit of cosmopolitization of, especially in Almaty. It looked like any other global city. You can get food from every part of the world, and it's starting to open up to rest of the world and cultures. Very peaceful place uh, to sort of travel and live through. 3 hours north of Delhi, so not a bad place to kind of make a trip if you live in Delhi or in India in general, or you can fly through either Dubai or I'm sure there are direct flights as well to Astana and Almaty. Uh, that's about it. My other major sort of observation or predictions or what the future for these Central Asian states would look like over the next 50 to 100 years with all their mineral wealth and everything. I don't think USA would be tapping into that. It's just because to get the things out of that Central Asia, what are the ports and the infrastructure needed? I don't think US would have direct access to it. Russia would continue to be the primary beneficiary, and because of their political ties from the past, would definitely be closely aligned to most of these Central Asian ex-Soviet states. China has definitely built a very phenomenal relationship with these Central Asian uh, political leaders and societies and have helped them to plug in into Chinese supply chains. India if it continues to grow economically, will definitely need access to minerals and resources. How would they do that if, sort of, Pakistan continues to play the spoil sport that it's playing, and Afghanistan sort of, stays in the turmoil? Once Afghanistan starts to settle down and India develops a good relationship with Afghanistan, which I think India is working on, then either through Iran's Chabahar and Afghanistan, India will get access to Central Asia, and that could be the possible route to plug Central Asia into India's economic lifeline or supply chain. Or in another 20, 30, 40 years, whatever time frame, near term, mid term, Pakistan mends its ways and starts to see the value and open the trade route through Pakistan for India to access Central Asia. China would definitely like to block it because they would like to have the exclusivity on the Central Asian resources. So, it helps to supply and demand and pricing from that perspective. If Central Asia get options, they start to get a little bit of a bargaining power, and that's never good for, you know, countries that are trying to have exclusive rights to certain resources. So that will definitely be a geopolitics of the future, uh, and we'll see how that plays out in the next 50 or 100 years. In terms of uh, cultural aspect that I saw, a lot of people especially there were a lot of Uzbeks and Tajiks and in their bazaars and markets, and they would, as soon as they would see Indians, they would know Bollywood songs, they would start to sing, which was heartening. But the second thing that you notice immediately is they start to talk about Babur, because Uzbeks are very proud. They think Babur conquered India, and they feel that close kinship, that they think there is a blood relationship between all these invaders in India. There definitely is, right? From that point, another thing that starts to jump out, I picked up a wonderful book, The History of Afghanistan, at Astana Airport. Uh, uh, I could not find such a book either in Europe or America, and the reason being because the book is written by Kazakh scholar who works for one of their think tanks out of Astana, and I'll share the name with you probably in the section of the video. And one thing, it's a good 900 page, very scholarly work. It's not a light read, but it reads very fluently, wonderfully written, beautifully written, where he says the entire Central Asia lived and thrived because of its access to India. And this is he's talking about for the last 2000 years while he's writing the history of Afghanistan. So all the rulers who ruled either Central Asian states or who ruled Afghanistan, none of their kingdoms survived if they did not have access to India. India was almost like a country of resource for them that they would loot and plunder, and all that wealth that they got, that they shared, because of which they could sustain the armies and their kingdom, and they could share the wealth. On their own, there's not much that they grow, or they have the, sort of the land and the weather and the seasons like Indo-Gangetic plains of India and the rivers of, Punjab and the entire all the way up to southern India, where things grow round the year, and those things were the wealth that made India land of milk and honey, that these guys from Central Asia would come, invade, plunder, and go back. So if you look at the history of invasion into India, all these Taimurs and Baburs and Khiljis and Abdalis and Nadir Shahs of the world, whoever was strong enough could muster thousand of couple of thousand people, and then could build the army along the way, could make the deals with the other tribes to give him men so they could share the loot and bounty. Their whole objective was not to so much convert it into India into Islamic, but it was mainly, hey, loot, plunder, bring back, and and what in new nation states countries do is to improve the life quality of life for their own people. They were doing the same for their own people, but along the way, what happened? These looting and plundering took a toll on the northern India and Western India, where all these looters and plunderers, and in India, the culture was that all the wealth, the societies and families, temples were the central, sort of almost like treasuries of each one of the small social setup, could be a village or a city or whatnot. So these guys would loot and plunder the temples, would kill the people, take them as slaves, and their only way to survive once they became Islamic, to either convert them to Islam or so they disrupted the whole social and political life of India, especially in the northwest and the east, and then slowly it started to go all the way up to south. So from 900 to 1750, 800, 1800s till the Britishers came over, India went through this 900 years of looting and plundering. And when I call India Bharat, I mean all the way from Gandhar to you know to east. And as soon as they would come Hindu Kush mountains and cross those, they would land into the Sindhu River Valley, and then they would go all the way as deep in as they could go for as long as they could. They would loot and plunder it back, and then distribute it based on whichever tribe contributed however many men. And this is, of course, this was my sort of reading and assessment before, but after I read this history of Afghanistan by Akim Bakov, and a Kazakh scholar, and he gives you a very detailed and in-depth scholarly account of each one of these people. Abdalis to Durranis and all these kingship that came in Afghanistan, they survived because they had access to Indian resources. And that's why later on, Babur and all, why would they go back to, Uzbek and all these places where cold, dry, wind, nothing grows? So they looted few times and they said, why are we going back every time? Why don't we just settle down there? And that's how Mughals, which is an offshoot of Mongols, Turkish speaking, and they settle down. So all the modern strife that you see in the Indian social and political system is the aftermath of 900 years worth of invasions, you might call. And as I was talking in yesterday's videos, people who have lived and now are living in India, Islamic background, the Muslims, who either came and settled here or people who got converted here, they would not find a better place than India when it comes to resources, living a happy life, growing and sort of developing yourself intellectually. You go to Central Asia, these are very sort of virgin, untapped, and sort of very rudimentary societies. There is not that complexity of thought and intellect that has been developed there. So when these invaders and everybody came, plundered, looted temples, this and that, and now Ayodhya judgment coming out in India and all this, it's almost a moment for atonement for all these invaders and looters and their offsprings who are living in India. They need to sort of, introspect on it, and their forefathers and their, ancestors who were doing this thing in the Indian subcontinent, whether they did it intentionally, they spread Islam intentionally. If one thing is for sure, they were plunderers who came to loot the wealth, unleashed the suffering on the natives who were living there, and took away their wealth as much as they could. And later on, when they didn't want to go back, they settled there, but they were still subjugating the native people and the tribes of the subcontinent. So they have done the wrong. They have done their forefathers. When I'm saying them, not them, but their ancestors. So they need to introspect and find a way to atone it. So rather than fighting the Sanatani people of Southeast Asia and now saying we want this Ayodhya judgment, we won't accept, we will want the land, and we will not give Gyanvapi mosque and Mathura and whatnot. Ideally, they should be saying, hey, look, now we are here, we are natives, we are part of you, our forefathers messed up, here is a way to say sorry, we'll give you all these, your holy places, there is no more looting and plundering happening, so let's reconcile that way. So that whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, that concept has to be brought into India. These right-wingers, Islamic people and Muslims in India, they need to realize, accept, and sort of mature into the thought that they are part of India, therefore their future generations are going to live in India. They need to sever that emotional superiority thread that it's tying them to the Central Asia and Middle East, and they need to find a way to reconcile with the natives of this land. And even if you keep your culture and your religion, your way of practicing, your path to search truth, keep it. Nobody's going to question it. But you don't want to enforce that Mongolian attitude in modern nation states, because it's not going to yield any positive results or outcome for you guys or for the local people. In fact, if you continue to be stubborn, if you continue to act as a one unit who's against the Hindus or native sons of soil or cultures, you are almost, giving the image that as if you are still living in 1700s or 1800s, as if you are still the foreigner who's here to loot and plunder and feel superior and stay above the natives. And that feeling will generate a counter reaction in the natives. And when I'm calling natives, I mean Sanatani people, and they are going to not be in good terms with you, and that social strife is going to reflect where both the parties are going to lose in the long run. And so that has to happen. Now, don't expect Hindus to continue to become the carpet for you guys, and you guys are going to roll over them and continue to think that you're exerting the same sort of control and power on the name of secularism or constitutionality, what you did during Mughal era or even in the British era. Those days are gone, and I don't think it's coming back in terms of my projection where things are heading for India and China. So my trip to Central Asia kind of gave me this first-hand view of why these invasions happen there, because there was nothing to be settled down and create a well-settled, intellectually enriching society in Central Asia. So they were invading India through Afghanistan and all these regions. That whole Central Asian routes to India, the impact it had on Afghanistan, Central Asia, and India becomes very clear once you go there. And even in modern day and age, if these Central Asian states did not have oil and gas and natural resources, they would be living like nomads, because there is nothing else to sort of tap into. Now, there are very few societies like Switzerland that they don't have natural resources, but they work on internally to become intellectually capable, to become part of global value chains and contribute positively. But to do that and to get there, it requires hundreds and hundreds of years of sort of social evolution in a society, which I don't think has happened in these Central Asian states yet. But hopefully, by the time they run out of these resources, they have get enough wealth, they get good political stability and social stability, that they can hunker down, grow, and become part of global value chain and humanity in a positive way. But the impact of Central Asia in the last 100,000 and the last 1,000, 1,500 years, that is it has had on Southeast Asia. Once you land there, you see the people, the culture, everything. It starts to become very clear why these invaders would come into India, and why India was the land of milk and honey that they had to loot to be able to sustain their societies back in Central Asia and Afghanistan. Post World War One, new nation states have come into being. All these cultures still haven't sort of reconciled that they can't be, that there is no way they can now invade and loot and plunder. So what future they want to create for themselves, they need to figure out. Afghanistan is still figuring out. There's no way they have any idea of what to do. That's why you see the mess there. Central Asians, fortunately for them, they have the natural resources that Russia and China have sort of tapped into. So they are by force keeping a social stability there, and that is good for them, and it's good for the people who need their natural resources. Pakistan is struggling because they're still living in that Mughal superiority la la land, and what they have made out of their country. You can see that. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has done it better, because being on the east of India, they sort of separated themselves from the Wahhabi influence a little bit. So they have become more sort of culturally tuned to their Bengali roots, and they are starting to grow their country from that perspective. India, of course, is trying to, of course, lay the path towards the future. Majority being Sanatani or Hindu, they're definitely sort of moving in a very what I call a prosperous future. And since Sanatan culture has had that rich, intellectual base of Vedic and pre-invasion time, they are sort of reconnecting, regrooming that, and they're going to build a foundation for a prosperous future on that. Who will be the net losers is the Afghanistan and the Pakistani, because they are thinking and aligning themselves more with Middle East and Central Asia rather than India. And if they do it, and they can, sort of become more stable, grounded, real, sort of realign their cultural identity and find peace in that, and knowing that they were son of the soil, and they need to be more aligned to India rather than Central Asia. They can probably then grow as well. But till that happens, Pakistan will continue to be struggling. Afghanistan will continue to be struggling quite a bit, uh, and for at least for a foreseeable future, 30 to 50 years, if not more. And my prediction is that the Islamic people or Muslims in India who have Ashrafi class, the 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 class that thinks that they came from Middle East and Central Asia and are settled in India, till they get out of that Ashrafi mindset and become normal as any other being who lives in India, and sort of finds the harmony in the democratic, uh, native secular lifestyle of India, they'll continue to struggle as well. So I call out the difference between Arif Muhammad Khan class of Muslims and Owaisi kind of Muslims. If more and more Muslims starts to gravitate towards Arif Muhammad Khan Sahib, India will be more socially stable, politically stable, which will be good for everybody. But if more of these Owaisis continue to, create noise in the system, the harder it'll be, and it'll be hard for their own community. They just need to sort of realize it and accept it. So that was my general observation around my trip to Central Asia, my observations, and and how it impacts today's uh, geopolitical climate and what I see the future in this whole thing. So wanted to share that with you all, and I'm sure as the time passes, some of the observations will change a little bit, will change the colors, will change the commentary, but overall contours probably will not change much and will stay the same. So that's where I would like to stop, and wish everyone a wonderful life. Enjoy yourself, be nice to kids and plants and animals, and have fun. Bye.